Okay, so as I said, exciting moment because maybe we are finishing this whole work, not just this chapter, but being that this is the final chapter of the entire work of Likutei Amarim, the first of the 5 books within Tanya. We might be finishing it tonight. We might not. But, it says, Hakol holech achar hachisum. Everything follows a conclusion. So, hey, if you missed the past few years, but you came tonight, this is really good. All right. So what were we saying? We were explaining that after the destruction of the temple, God needs a home, right? He had a temple. Then he had the other temple. Now he has nothing. So his home is halacha, Jewish law, and more broadly, the entire Torah. Well, how do you find a home in a book, in words? So the Rebbe explains. When we study Torah, and most specifically study halacha, but in general, when we study Torah, we are creating for God a home. His home is in me, in my mind, in my heart, in my soul. So God had a home, then that got destroyed. God got another home, then that got destroyed, and God got me. God got you. God got us. Not only is the home in the study of Torah, the Rebbe is saying the study of Torah expresses itself in the fulfillment of the commandments. Because when you do a mitzvah, that's like giving flesh to the law. So the study of the Jewish law, that's God's home. The manifestation of the Jewish law is when you do the commandment, which goes back to the idea of a whole body experience, a physical experience, impacting planet Earth experience. And we said that this is coming from a very high level because biblically there are 613 commandments plus 7 unique independent commandments of the rabbis, which creates 620. 620, if we remember, is a numerical value of the word keser or keter, which means a crown. And just as a crown, like that dome, is encompassing, it symbolizes encompassing energies that are too big to get within. So we have energies that are too big to get within, but when I put a coin in my charity box, I'm drawing them down. When I make a choice and eco them down. When I put a mezuzah on my doorpost, I'm drawing them down. So on one hand, these energies are, whoa, they're the crown. They're beyond the body of God's energies. They're the encompassing, keser, koser, makif, encompassing energies. They're way too high to get in. And put a nickel in your charity box and you drew them down. Put a parchment on your doorpost, you draw them down. Make a choice, and when you're enjoyed by this product and not that product, and you draw them down. So on one hand, they're such intense energies, but they're so accessible to us. And specifically accessible in the action. It's very interesting. We're coming to the conclusion. And as we said, everything follows the conclusion. So here in Tanya, we've been discussing a very spiritual, lofty, sublime concepts, working on our love of God, our awe of God, speaking of levels and levels of godliness. But in the end of the day, it all comes down to action. It all comes down to bringing it to planet Earth and making it literally a bodily experience. Meaning, obviously, if you learn Torah, if I learn Torah, you learn Torah. Right now we're learning Torah. We're physical people. And the only way we can learn Torah is with a physical body. So learning Torah is a body experience. But it's a little more cerebral, it's a little remote from the body, though it's definitely part of my body. And anything we do is a body experience because we're physical people. And if we love God, that's also a body experience because it's the physical flesh of our heart that's loving. And if we contemplate God's oneness, it's also a physical experience because it's my human brain cells that are contemplating. So we can never escape having a physical experience, which is good. But as the Alter Rebbe has been pointing out to us many times in Tanya, we like when it's really physical, which means it's more like a whole body experience. So when I'm doing an action, really something of my physical body, not my higher powers of thought and emotion, this got even more physical, great, because God wants to come all the way. So that was a brief recap of what we've done so far, or exactly where we're holding. So we are on the second to last page of Tanya, of Likutei Amarim, second half of Ayin Dalet, page 148. And we are 4 lines from the bottom up to the last word. What we have now is 2 quotations. The quotations when the Alter Rebbe quotes, he's coming to prove something. He said it, and now we believe him, but he's proving it. So what are we proving here? We said, Hashem b'chachma yasad aretz. So that's a quote. God with chachma, which of course we loosely translate as with wisdom, but means this level of chachma, we call chachma ila'ah, the supernal, sublime chachma. Chachma being, as we normally translate it, this like a seminal wisdom, preceding thought. So this is specifically chachma of the world of Atzilus, this highest level of God's revelation, the highest level of God's thought, which of course we've been discussing over these last few chapters as the place that contains God's infinite energies. So Hashem b'chachma yasad aretz. God with this faculty of chachma ila'ah, of the seminal wisdom, of chachma of the highest world, the world of being, the world of Atzilus, founded the land. We're talking about chachma of Atzilus. What do we mean by aretz, land here? There's nothing physical in Atzilus. So what it means is the lowest dimension within the parameters of chachma of Atzilus. Like the land, the bottom, what's on the bottom. So what's on the bottom of the, if we remember, we've discussed this, the palace of each world. The highest world, the top floor, floor number 10, is chachma, seminal wisdom. And the bottom floor, that's what I call it, the first floor, the bottom floor is malchus, sovereignty, God's aretz. You can say, why is that God's aretz? But we know there's this connection between malchus and the land, even though what we're talking here about is malchus of Atzilus, which is not physical at all. But if we look at the colors, when we look at spirituality and the different divine emanations, the spheros, the divine attributes, and they each have a color, hue. So malchus is brown. Why is it brown? So one understanding of it's brown is because malchus, sovereignty, is the composite of everything that came before it. And if you mix all the colors together, you're going to get brown. Probably used to do that when we were kids at some point. But also, brown represents the earth. Aretz, the land, the earth. So what's the connection between the land and malchus, this dimension of God? Well, of course, we know by now, because we've been discussing this the entire last chapter, that malchus is God's power of creation, right? The system that we learned very well last chapter, the infinity of God first invests itself in the will and wisdom of Atzilus, Ratzon Chacham Bina Das of Atzilus. Well, creation can't take place from there, that's way too high. And then that infinity of God invests itself in the lowest dimension of Atzilus, in Malchus, in sovereignty. Because it's the lowest, it has more of an ability to relate to the next dimension. More of an ability. We said it's still a challenge and it still needs a filter, and we discussed all that at length. But Malchus is God's tool of creation. So what does God's tool of creation have to do with the earth? Malchus, brown, like the land. What's the connection between the land and sovereignty? And we're reminding ourselves that sovereignty is God's power of creation. God creates through sovereignty. Sovereignty is the speech of God. God creates through his speech. It's his ability to let be something. Why is that most connecting to the earth? Because in our entire world, nothing more expresses the power of creation than earth. Because everything in our world that can procreate, that can produce, that can create something in its own image. If the monkey is creating a monkey, and if the human is creating a human, and if from the tree comes seeds and another tree comes forth, things create themselves, but not the earth. The earth is the only thing we have that, again, you put those seeds in it, but the power of earth is the power that's allowing creation to happen, and stimulated by the seeds, of course, but it's the power of earth that's the power of creation. And then what comes forth? Well, it depends on the seed. So all these different seeds are all stimulating the earth's power of creation, but then what is being created is as per the seed. So everything else just can create, and it's not a just, it's a very tremendous gift of God, so I shouldn't say just, but creates a continuation of itself, except the earth. The earth can create so many, many things. So that's why in our world, the earth represents God's power of creation. And sovereignty is God's power of creation. So therefore, earth is a very appropriate symbol for Malchus, for sovereignty, for God's power of creation. So the verse again says, Hashem b'chachma yasad aretz. God, the infinity of God, the limitless God, we call it Or Ein Sof, the limitless God, b'chachma, invests himself in seminal wisdom of Atzilus, chachma ila'ah, the supernal chachma, to yasad, to create, to found aretz, malchus. So we see here a connection that chachma, God's wisdom and God's home, because in every world, as we learned extensively last chapter, chachma is the vehicle, that's the kodesh kedoshim, the holy of holies, that's God's home on Atzilus and on Bria and on Yetzirah and on Asiya, in every world, and also in our world, it was Torah, God's chachma, the luchos, the tablets. So chachma is containing God's presence, but from there it flows down, 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 down to malchus, to creation, to be the continuum of God's presence. Now malchus, also remember, is God's speech, as I told you. So on one hand, aretz, the earth, symbolizes malchus because malchus and the earth both are creation. But once I move from aretz, earth, to malchus, malchus is God's speech. Dvar melech shilton, a king rules by his speech. This is the power of malchus, the power of kingship. This is the power of creation, how God's ruling. How does God make things be? Not with his hands, not with his thoughts, with his speech. Let there be, let there be, let there be. The 10 utterances in the very first chapter, first parak of Torah, Genesis 1, where we have 10 statements that are all God talking, and God's been saying those statements ever since 5,700 plus years, and that's how creation exists. So Malchus represents creation, which represents God's speech. In Torah, God's speech is symbolized by Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, the Torah of speech. Meaning we have originally the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and then they got added the prophets and the writings, and everything else, which Moses received, was all Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, which began to be written way, way after Moses got it. After the destruction of the Second Temple is when the Mishnah was first codified, the first very, very cryptic official writing of oral Torah. But again, the connection here we're making is land, that's Malchus, they both have creation. Malchus is speech, so in Torah it symbolizes the oral Torah. So Hashem, the Chachma, Yesad, Aretz, if we unpack and unpack and unpack, what we're saying is, from seminal wisdom, from Chachma Vatzilus, this invests itself in Torah Sheba'al Peh, in the oral Torah, in halacha, in Jewish law, which is Torah Sheba'al Peh. That was one quote to express the point that we've been discussing, and now we have another one. Torah Sheba'al Peh, sorry, first we explained this. Aretz refers to Torah Sheba'al Peh, as I just took a long time to explain those few words. Dinafka mechachma ila'ah, as it's written Kabbalistically, that the oral Torah emerges, comes out from seminal wisdom. So here we have seminal wisdom so high, but it invests itself in Malchus, in the speech of God, in Torah Sheba'al Peh, in the oral Torah, from which we derive all the laws. All halacha is derived from the oral Torah. So we're getting back to this point. Where's God's home? Halacha. We have the highest energies, Chachma, seminal wisdom, the Holy of Holies up there. And in our world, it comes down to Torah Sheba'al Peh. Therefore, where's God's home? Jewish law, halacha. And our fulfillment of it is, again, giving flesh to Jewish law, giving flesh to the Torah of speech, Torah Sheba'al Peh. And another quote. Now, this is Kabbalistic. Kimo Shekasav, as is written in Zohar, the Abba Yasad Barsa. So that's completely Kabbalistic, right? We see the aleph at the end. That means it's Aramaic. It's not Hebrew. Oh, that must be Kabbalistic. It is. It's from Zohar. I'll translate it and then I'll explain it. Abba Yasad Barsa means the father founded the daughter. What does that mean? Well, the father refers to Chachma. Oh, well, that makes sense. That's what we're talking about here. Yes, that's why the author brought it in. Always, when we look at the interaction of seminal wisdom, Chachma, and understanding the development of thought, Bina, one of the classic metaphors for this relationship and the dynamics of that relationship is that Chachma is the father and Bina is the mother. Meaning, the reason why that's what they represent is because Chachma as seminal wisdom is like that flash, that burst of thought that's, you can't even catch it. But we catch it by transforming it in Bina, in understanding, where we chew it and digest it and break it down and put it back together and synthesize and analyze and come to a complete thought. So in Chachma, it's just like, boom, you wake up in the middle of the night like, oh, you had that flash that you might have forgotten by now. And in Bina's way, it's not just a flash, it has to be fully developed and thought out. That's Bina. So that's like in the development of a child, the father giving the zera, the sperm, but then the mother developing that in the womb for 9 months. So father, mother, seminal wisdom, chachma, understanding bina. So therefore, Kabbalistically, when we say father, we know we're talking about chachma, seminal wisdom. Abba Yasad Barsa. The daughter refers to Malchus, because Malchus is the recipient. As I mentioned before, the other reason why Malchus is a color brown is because all of the other energies ultimately flow into her. It says Malchus lesle migamuhu klum. She's got nothing of her own. She's empty, but she's the fullest because everything from above ultimately funnels into her, and from that, creation emerges. So she absorbs everything and then produces from it. So being the recipient, she's metaphorically like the daughter. So Abba Yasad Barsa, if we decode that, means, just like we said before, Hashem b'chachma Yasad Aretz, seminal wisdom invests itself in, is expressed in the daughter Malchus sovereignty. And again, as we just explained and we just read that the Rebbe said, Malchus represents Torah Sheba'al Peh, because Malchus is God's speech, and Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, is God's speech. So, Abba Yasad Barsa, father founds the daughter, seminal wisdom, Chachma, creates Malchus, sovereignty, speech, Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, again is bringing out the same point that the Alter Rebbe said a long time, and now brings these two quotes, one from Torah Sheba'al Hashem b'chachma Yasad Aretz, one from Torah Sheba'al Peh and Pnimius HaTorah. Abba Yasad Barsa. So, but again, the exact same relation is brought out in both quotations from seminal wisdom, from Chacham Batzilus. This invests itself in Malchus, in the Torah of Malchus, because again, everything in these chapters, we keep going back to Torah, as I know we've spoken of many, many, many times. These very technical chapters are very much expressing the power and need and the significance. Everything comes from Torah. Everything is created by Torah. Everything is going toward Torah. So Hashem b'chachma Yasad Aretz and Abba Yasad Barsa, seminal wisdom, Chachma, expresses itself in Malchus, in the Torah of Malchus, Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, as Malchus is oral, which is, what is the oral Torah? Halacha, Gemara, Hashem Son. So therefore, now we're coming to answer the question we began chapter 51. So therefore, we see a very strong link between Chachma, seminal wisdom, and Halacha, Malchus, Torah Sheba'al Peh, and the fulfillment of that, which is by doing the mitzvahs. Before I keep going, I know I've spoken straight for a long time. Any questions on any of this, or any thoughts or reflections on any of this?
I just want to mention that it's kind of it's a difficult one to, I don't know, maybe I'm not focused enough today, but it sounds a little bit hard to understand this shiur. So I'll have to listen to it again.
Okay, you're saying you're not understanding the connection between Chachma and Malchus?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to make it really like short because sometimes when things are short, then we get it.
Okay.
The Alter Rebbe is wanting to show us that there's a very deep link between Chachma, which is wisdom, really the source of wisdom. Chachma is the source of wisdom, and mitzvahs maisius, practical mitzvahs. That's where we're going to with all this. Chachma and mitzvahs maisius, Chachma and practical mitzvahs, they have this deep, deep, deep link. Well, I wouldn't think they have a link because Chachma is like God's thoughts, the most spiritual elements in my own soul. It's my most spiritual part of my soul. And doing the practical commandments, like we're saying, like eating kosher and having a mezuzah and giving charity, I don't really see how those two are one. The Alter Rebbe wants us to understand they're one. And this is ultimately, as I'm saying, answering the question he began 2 chapters ago. Just what I said now. Ignore everything I said before. Did that make sense, Rachel?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much.
That's the bottom line.
Okay.
Sometimes we tell ourselves, I don't have to understand every quote. It's fine. Give me the bottom line.
Yeah. Exactly. Thank you.
So why are we going into this bottom line? What's going on here? We, a long time ago, in chapter 35, were introduced to a portion of Zohar spoken by what we call actually the child of Zohar. Everything in Zohar is basically Aramaic, so the child in Aramaic is Yenuka. So the Yenuka of Zohar is like the voice of the child, literally a child, obviously a brilliant child, but who's coming from a certain place that a child can come from, and therefore he recognizes, in a way that maybe when you're an adult you lose it a little, the value of the action, the supremacy of action. So we got this quote. It was a pretty big chunk from the Zohar for Tanya. Tanya's usually more like a line or two, where the Yenuka said that it says a person cannot go 4 amos, like 6 feet, bareheaded. That's why men wear a head covering. Why? Because of the divine presence that's on our head. And then the Yenuka connects this to a verse. I don't want to give too many verses because I see they can confuse things, so we'll skip it. But there's a verse that says, I'll skip some, but I'm giving some. Shemen al roshcha yechsar. Make sure you're not lacking oil on your head. It says, oil on my head? What do I want oil on my head for? Well, the Yenuka explains, because we have a flame on our head. The flame is God's presence, what we call loosely the Shekhinah, the dwelling of God. God's presence is on every one of us. It's on our head. It's on our body. But a flame doesn't stay. If you just if you lit a match, well, we all know, and there goes it. Well, let's say you have a wick. You light a match and you put it on your thread. There goes it. The flame doesn't stay on the match and the flame doesn't stay on the wick. For the flame to stay and not leave, we need food for the flame, an anchor for the flame, a combustible for the flame. Basically, a form of oil, right? A candle is a form of oil. So you can have a pot of oil, you can have a candle, think of your Shabbos lights, your Hanukkah menorah, and any time you've dealt with candles. And we have the wick, we have the oil, the wax. Now I'm going to put the flame, and now it will last as long as there's oil, as long as there's wax, as long as there's a food that's fueling the flame and keeping the flame here on this world and not gone. That was a very physical metaphor, right? I hope I didn't lose anyone because that's really physical. We all have candles, we all have matches, we can all relate to hopefully this. So the Yenuka is saying, God's presence on us, that's the flame. The wick, Well, in chapter 35, the wick seemed to be the body. Here, we're going to switch it slightly, but going back to chapter 35, the body. And what's the oil? What's keeping the flame of God on me? So the oil, the combustible, the food of the flame is your mitzvahs maisius, is your action commandments. And therefore, when it says make sure there's oil on your head, it means to make sure that the presence of God stays on you and doesn't leave you. Make sure you always have oil. Make sure you're always doing the action commandments. As you do the commandments, God's presence stays on you. You stop doing the commandments. There's no more fuel. There's no more oil. There's no more wax. The flame goes away. The nature of a flame is to go up, not stay down here. So it only is anchored here because of the food, the fuel, the oil. The oil is finished. The fuel, the food is finished. It goes up. Okay. Just because what Rachel said before, and I don't want to lose people. Anyone didn't understand the metaphor of the flame, the wick, the oil, God's presence, the body, are commandments that are the fuel that keep the flame of God on us. Hope that means yes. Don't be embarrassed, because I could not be saying it clearly. And very possible. Okay, so assuming it's all perfectly clear, and that's why nobody's telling me they're not following. Got it. Okay, someone graciously sent me a message that they got it.
And Torah study as well.
I'm sorry?
And Torah study as well.
Okay, that's the question. Oh my God, did everyone hear what we just were told? She said, and Torah study as well. You just said the question. You are on the ball. This is the question that the Alter Rebbe raised very cryptically in the beginning of chapter 51. Well, what's the question? In case she said it too cryptically. In the Zohar, the Yenuka, the child of Zohar, is saying the oil is the action commandments. But classically, that's not oil. We actually don't ever see oil representing action. It just doesn't. You know, I'm sure many of us are also remembering this. Maybe we're not as fast, but we're all remembering it. What does oil always symbolize? Oil symbolizes Hasidus. Oil symbolizes Torah. Oil symbolizes this high energy. Oil symbolizes God's Chachma. That's what oil symbolizes, right? And many of you might or might not remember, like Hanukkah time, we probably speak about it a lot, that oil is like the essence that penetrates everything but stays remote from everything. But you put a little oil in your salad, that little bit of oil flavors your whole salad, but then it could congeal because it's really never a part of things. It's like essence energy. It's Hasidus energy. It's God's seminal wisdom energy, which comes down in this world as Torah. Absolutely. So what is the Yenuka doing? Right? The Yenuka created this beautiful concept, really nice, seemingly really understandable, right? You should never walk bareheaded because you always want to be conscious of the divine presence on your head. You always want to make sure there's oil. And he brought in verses to prove all this. You want to bring in oil. The oil maintains the flame of God on the wick of man. And then he says, and what is that oil? The mitzvahs. And we're saying, wait a minute. That's not what oil symbolizes. That's not what oil is. Oil is seminal wisdom. Oil is Torah. Oil is Hasidus. That's what oil is. Well, what's Yenuka thinking here? That's the question. And that question we began unpacking in chapter 51. And now, through everything we learned, hopefully it's clear. What have we just said, which was really the emphasis point? Those two quotes I spent a long time trying to explain. Hashem b'chachma yasad aretz, Abba yasad barsa. God with seminal wisdom founded Malchus, land, the oral Torah. Abba yasad barsa. Seminal wisdom founds sovereignty, Malchus, the oral Torah, law. These ideas culminating in these verses is saying there's a deep link between Chachma, seminal wisdom, the traditional oil, and the mitzvahs. You say, well, what's the link? Well, this is what the Alter Rebbe has been explaining to us until now. That we have Chachma, right? We've been spending chapters now, 51, 52, and 53, understanding seminal wisdom, understanding that seminal wisdom is the Holy of Holies. Seminal wisdom on every world is the Torah of that world, is the Holy of Holies of that world, is where God's infinite presence is found in every single world. Torah. We said even in this world, in our Holy of Holies. Why is it the Holy of Holies? Because we've got the Ark, we've got the tablets, we've got the Luchos. That's the Holy of Holies, Torah, seminal wisdom, oil. But we just said, you know what? It's not enough to be this spiritual, lofty, God's thought, which is amazing and powerful. We also want to bring it down in the most physical way possible. So how do we take seminal wisdom and bring it down the most physical way possible? We do a mitzvah. Why is doing a mitzvah bringing down seminal wisdom? Because seminal wisdom is expressed in Torah, as we were just reminded. And Torah is manifest when a Jew does a physical act. That's God's will. So you might not know the whole backstory. You're just taking a coin and putting it in your charity box. You're just looking in the store and saying, oh, this has kosher certification, this doesn't. Okay, I'll spend the extra pennies or dollars. I'm going to buy the kosher. I'm putting a box with a kosher parchment on my doorpost. I'm doing physical acts. True, you're doing physical acts. But those physical acts are like the bottom of something high, till God's seminal wisdom containing the infinity of God himself. I don't understand any of that. You don't have to understand it. It's just the reality. It's just the facts. What you do is like the bottom of a rope, that action, but what you're pulling by the action goes all the way to God's thoughts, to the Holy of Holies of the spiritual worlds, to the infinity of God invested in seminal wisdom in Torah. So now we understand. Always, oil is seminal wisdom, Chachma, Hasidus, Torah. And the Yanuka decides oil is a mitzvah. And the Yanuka is absolutely right, which doesn't mean everyone else is wrong. Because the physical manifestation of that seminal wisdom is going to be when you do an action commandment. Well, why do I care so much about a physical manifestation of a mitzvah, of Torah, of Chachma? I mean, like, it's cerebral, it's spiritual. Let me learn, let me get inspired, and then let me learn some more and get more inspired. And Torah does so much, and my love and fear does so much. What do I have to come down to the physical? Like, who cares? So the Rebbe is now going to explain, who cares? Well, you care, and God cares. Why does God care? Because that's what he's doing all this for, right? That's his desire, is a transformation of the physical world. But you also care because of course we care because we love God and we want to do God's will. And what are we here for? If not to serve, if not to fulfill God's will. But also on my personal level, I want a relationship with God. I want his light on me. I want the flame of God on my wick. Now, I told you in chapter 35, the implication was that the wick was the body. Here we're shifting it slightly, and we're looking at that wick as the animal soul. But we give the animal soul a nicer name. Normally we say animal soul, but sometimes in Tanya, we say the vital soul, nefesh hachiyunis. Why is the animal soul called the vital soul? Because one of her jobs, obviously the main job of the animal soul that we all know, is to challenge us, right? That one we're very familiar with. The evil inclination, harnessing our animal soul, creates a lot of challenges. We know that. But the animal soul has other jobs. Ultimately, by Mashiach, the animal soul is going to be completely subsumed by the godly soul. And we're going to have such force to serve God, which is the reality of a tzaddik, a perfectly godly individual who has destroyed his evil inclination. And since evil inclination is gone, because he's destroyed it, the animal soul is harnessed by the godly soul. The animal soul is subsumed in the godly soul. And how does a person know that? There's no microscope to analyze your inner spiritual world. It's very easy. Suddenly you're flying in your service of God because you've got all this animal energy, and animals are really powerful. I mean, we know because we know the challenge. So imagine if we took that challenge and harnessed it to serve God. Well, that will be all of our realities by Mashiach, because again, the evil inclination won't be challenging us. It's an angel. It's working for God. So no more will it be the challenge. What will our animal soul be doing? He's serving God with such power. So the primary in our practical reality understanding of the animal soul is the challenge. Also, ultimately, for the tzaddik, for the most godly people, and for all of us by Mashiach, to serve God, to be subsumed and harnessed by the godly soul. But there's also a third function of the animal soul, which is to be the vital soul. In Hebrew, nefesh hachiyunis, to be the transfer of life from the godly soul to the body. Meaning all life comes from the godly soul. All life comes from God. So all life comes in our body from our godly soul. But our bodily soul is so beyond a physical body. It doesn't want to or necessarily can easily directly connect from godly soul transfer to physical body life. So the godly soul is harnessing in this way the animal soul to be the conduit through which life is given to the body. Now, in that dimension, for that job description, the animal soul is viewed as the vital soul, the one that passes to us vitality, the nefesh hachiyunis. So we said in chapter 35, the wick was the body. Now, in the end of chapter 53, not a conflict. We're focusing on the vital soul. It's not a conflict because the body and animal soul is vital soul, are like one entity. They're like inseparable. So in 35, we're focusing more on the physical dimension of it, the flame of God on my body. And here we're focusing on the flame of God on my animal soul, nefesh hachiyunis. This is one of the overarching reasons why we're all here. Meaning, well, why are we here? Probably say to bring Mashiach. We are all here to bring Mashiach. But we also have individual jobs. How do you know what your job is? Well, look what's challenging you. That's the key. That's your job. That's why it's challenging to you. But we also have overarching individual jobs. And the overarching individual job we all have is to give God our animal, to give God our animal soul, to give God our body, right? My godly soul is kedusha. It's godliness. It starts off as godliness. My evil inclination is klipas tameus, evil impurity that I cannot refine. If I'm a tzaddik, I can destroy it. For the rest of us, we just hope we don't succumb to it. But for my animal soul and my body, they are from klipas noiga. They are from the intermediate level where it's a klipa. There's a barrier, but I can penetrate that barrier. I can access the godliness. I can elevate it.
I was just thinking of something. Flames also go up, and so does oil. If you put oil on water, oil's on top. But it seems that even though we could call these objects the wick or the oil, such as Torah, I would think that mitzvahs are the flame. It's sort of like you have a book in the library, and the book means nothing unless you read it, digest it, understand it, and perhaps put it into action. So that's my take. I think the mitzvahs are the flames, and the oil is the Torah, all these physical objects that we have around us, the mezuzah, etc.
I hear you.
Your thoughts?
I hear you. The reason why the Alter Rebbe is looking at the oil as the mitzvahs and the flame as God is because he's following the Zohar. This is what it states in the Yenuka. And this is, again, based on a verse. It says, Keval kecha eish ochlahi. Your God is a flaming fire. Fire is the metaphor we usually use for the most spiritual element. As you said, fire ascends. Fire always flies high. The nature of fire is to ascend. So fire is a good metaphor in our very physical world for spirituality. Mitzvahs, as we're understanding them, are more not expressing spirituality. They're expressing the transformation of the physical as a vehicle for God. So fire, which is a great metaphor for spiritual and more fire, or sometimes the sun or sunlight, also the same concept. They're representing spiritual dimensions, and the mitzvahs are more representative by physical things, because the whole concept is that the practical mitzvahs, the action commandments, are the means by which the physical becomes transformed to the godly. So there's a fire burning, but it's a covert fire. Because what I see on the surface is physical, but look closely, by Mashiach we'll be able to see it. There's that fire. There's that fire of God. Because that fire of God is in everything. Now, someone sent me a question. So does the animal soul compare, which was a good question, trying to connect these ideas. And obviously I didn't make the connection. So I understand the thought as we made this thing of seminal wisdom, sovereignty, Chachmas and Malchus Batzilus, and Torah. Does that connect then? We're talking about the fire of God, and the animal soul is the animal soul Malchus. So no, the animal soul, and I'm so glad the question was asked. I totally see, if I was linking in my brain parallelism, that's exactly where I would go as well. But no, it's not that. It's seminal wisdom is like the top of the rope. I'm going to use that metaphor. Malchus is the bottom of the rope. It's one rope. It's a rope connecting man to God. The top of that is all the spiritual energy of seminal wisdom, the oil. But the oil is the entire rope. So the bottom of that is Malchus. What Malchus is representing, putting it in this paradigm, is the practical mitzvahs. How do I get Malchus practical mitzvahs? Because Malchus sovereignty is the Torah Sheba'al Peh, speech and speech. And the Torah Sheba'al Peh is the oral law from which we derive all the mitzvahs. So from Malchus, it's quality of speech, the Torah of speech, from which all the commandments are derived. So Malchus ultimately, if you follow the steps, is the commandments. Chachma is God's seminal wisdom, is this very, very spiritual energy, which is the source of all Torah. And God's holy of holies and Chassidus and all these very high dimensions. But all of that has to come down to the practical mitzvahs. So neither are the flame. Let's not get confused here. The flame, I wish I had a board. Oh, well, teacher without a board. The flame is God. He is the fire. I want that flame on my head. Well, if I just learned Torah, which isn't a just, right now, we're learning Torah, we're learning Tanya, we're learning Chassidus, we're learning Chachma, Avatzilus, we're learning seminal wisdom. That's what we are doing right now. I'm learning seminal wisdom. Isn't the flame of God on my head when I'm learning? Yeah, to a certain degree. Yes, of course. Of course. It's the oil. It's the food for the fire. But the Alter Rebbe says, it's not enough that the fire should be hovering in this peripheral way on your head. We want the fire to char out your impurities. We want the fire to consume without consuming and leaving, to be maintained on your head in a way. And again, if we can think of a candle, right? You start off with a candle fresh out of the box, white wax, white wick. But obviously, as we all know, as you're going to light your match to it, when the candle's gone, whatever remains of the wick is black, right? White wick. Flame is like orange red. What's black? Where'd the black come in? Well, I mean, we all know this. I mean, we don't think deeply into it. We know, whatever that means, that the flame, as it's on that wick, is charring the wick. Okay, it's fine. What do we care? If you think about the real spiritual manifestation of this flame and wick, we care. Because the flame of God on the wick of man, body, previously, now animal soul in her nicer component, the vital soul, is getting charred. What does charred mean? Charred means the flame is eating away at the wick. All right, well, if it's a wick, I mean, it's cotton or thread, okay, whatever's getting eaten away, it's all getting burnt. But since we're talking about God energy, that's the flame What is being consumed when that flame is on your body and animal soul? What would it mean the presence of God is on your animal soul? It's very interesting. Where's the godly soul? Where is she in this metaphor? God already has the godly soul. You're not in this world to refine your godly soul. Does your godly soul gain by you being in this world? Absolutely. God would never hold back, anyone's reward. And the godly soul gains tremendously by being in this world. But that's like a side note. What you have to deal with, and me too, is our body and our animal soul. And our body and our animal soul, they need a lot of charring. They need a lot of refinement. What's more refining than God's presence on them? So you could say, okay, so what's more refining than learning Hasidus? Right? Hasidus, seminal wisdom, the oil. Let me learn a lot of Hasidus, and this will refine me. Well, that's a great strategy, and it will. And I highly encourage it. Please keep coming to the Tanya share and anything else. Yes, that works. But the Alter Rebbe says, but your animal soul, and I'm saying parenthetically your body, though he doesn't reference the body here, but that was chapter 35. We'll just say your animal soul. Your animal soul, it's got more components than can be affected only by spirituality. Your animal soul, your body, they're in the physical reality. Physical is going to affect them a lot more than spiritual. If we wanted to affect another Jew, we make nice food, we make sure our house is clean, we connect to their animal, and also bring in the godly, of course. But generally we do both. We're physical people. Our animal soul, of course, is a spiritual entity, but it's interwoven with our body. So yes, learning Hasidus, seminal wisdom, Chachma v'Tzilus, pure oil, definitely affects your animal soul. But not enough, because your animal soul is immersed in the physicality of this world. But when I do a mitzvah, that mitzvah, that's physical. I'm taking physical money and giving it to God. That's intense physical. Right? I'm messing up the decor of my house with those boxes on my walls. That's intense physical. I'm dressing differently because God wants me to. That's real physical. I can't put this food in my mouth. I have to put this food in my mouth. That's physical. So when I'm going to the physicality of physical, what's the difference between me and the rest of the world? Because I'm doing it God's way. I'm taking physical, but that physical is oil because it's God's way. So now this high seminal wisdom, Hasidus, intense energy has come all the way down to be an action that's really going to grab my animal soul and really allow it to be burnt up for God.